I want to just acknowledge my co-authors really quickly. I work a lot with Dr. David Wester. Dr. Wester is a statistician's guru and plant guru, and just I like working with him because we know we're always going to get the statistics right when he's with us. And Joey Cortez was the graduate student who worked on this project for us. A little bit of background. Jonah did mention that this study was specifically done for ocelots. We didn't do any work with ocelots, but the problem and the question is all about creating habitat for them. They're found only in Willacy and Cameron counties in South Texas anymore. There may be some in Arizona, but or other places, but really not documented. They use here in the United States, they use, or in Texas, I should say, they use really dense thorn scrub. Some people call it thorn shrub habitat. And right now, that only makes up about less than 1% of the lower Rio Grande Valley. They use a much wider variety of habitat in Central and South America, but here they're really relegated to this very dense thorn scrub. There are possibly less than 80 individuals remaining. Their current problems include vehicle collisions and some inbreeding because the population is so small. In the past, and one of the reasons why they have so many problems is lack of habitat, reduction in habitat due mostly to urbanization and agriculture, and that's only going to continue in the lower Rio Grande Valley because it's one of the fastest growing places in the United States. So what's Tamaulipan thorn scrub? Let's look at that for a minute. It's a really dense, very dense type of vegetation. It's subtropical, semi-arid, woody vegetation. All of the plants can poke you with something. They're they're well armed, and when you get in there and you really start looking at the species that are there, it's a very diverse place, incredibly diverse. And so there's just a few of the common species listed there. Over a third of the species that we find in the Tamaulipan thorn scrub are legumes. And so that's kind of special, I think, because they do make some changes to the soil. It's a really poor soil, as you can imagine, sandy usually in South Texas. And so I think that the legumes are, doing lots of special stuff, including nitrogen fixing below ground. And there are a lot of other animals that use this habitat. Bobcats and coyotes are also there. Some work by other scientists at the Cesar Kleberg Institute, like Dr. Tuas and Dr. Lombardi, indicate that those guys all live together. They have, different times of the days when they're out and about and hunting, and they seem to work fairly well together. I'm sorry if you're hearing a little bit of noise. My cat has decided to, bat something around on the floor while I do this. Anyway, in the past, and the reason why there's so little thorn scrub left is because it's just largely been removed, like I said, for urban or agricultural uses. And most of it was removed mechanically, more than likely through, root plowing or chaining or disking or whatever. Some of it may have been removed with chemical herbicide application. Prescribed fire really doesn't work very well because it takes grass to carry fire down here, and when you have really thick shrub like that, you don't get much grass. But it was probably mechanically removed. We're not the first to try restoration here, and we knew that it would be difficult going into it. It always has been. There have been some issues that have been identified in the past, and first and foremost, these brush species really grow very slowly. So waiting for them to turn into this natural multi-stemmed habit is just not an option. And when I say they grow slowly, I mean these, these vegetative communities, it might take hundreds, it might even take thousands of years for them to become that old growth, really diverse, incredibly dense system. And I think Joni mentioned that we're studying the lomas in South Texas also, and they're a lot of the same species, and those lomas are millennial old. So I think maybe these guys are too, this thorn scrub habitat, not the individual trees, but the communities. It takes a long time. So, also with restoration projects in the past, the sapling mortality is very high. So when you plant, these little trees or these little shrub plants, um, it's just a very harsh environment to try to get something growing in. And there's lots of drought. It's incredibly hot, sandy soils. And also they have to be planted really densely. And by densely, I mean several plants per square meter, hundreds to thousands of plants per acre is what the recommendations have been from Dr. Tuas and other people who have studied this in the past. Past projects have used tree tubes to get the planting started, and that does increase the success of establishment just because it, provides some protection to that little bitty sapling as you're sticking it in the ground. It creates some problems of its own, though. One of the biggest problems is it usually creates a single stem tree-like form. These woody species, they're very malleable. They're very, you can manipulate them and shape them kind of how you want a little bit. They're all resprouters, though. Almost all. I probably shouldn't say all because somebody will point out one that doesn't resprout. But, almost everything woody in South Texas is going to resprout if you take off the top. And what the ocelots need is something that has many, many stems coming out, very low to the ground, is a multi-stem thing. These tree tubes make a tree. Basically, they create a single stem. It also weakens the stem, and then when you remove the tree tube, it's a little bit vulnerable. Recommendations for a really good ocelot for places that ocelots will use. Go back to 1995, a paper by Schindel, and he recommended more than 85% canopy cover, more than 2 meters height of the canopy, and almost 100% visual obstruction. And if you look at it, you can't look much farther than 10 feet or 20 feet maybe into this really dense vegetative type. So the question was, how can we quickly grow some seedlings into that dense multi-stemmed habit? And particularly, are there tools that can be used in large areas? Because when we're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of seedlings per acre, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of manpower. We need to be able to create more than an acre at a time, to do any good for ocelots. So our specific objectives with this project were to test the effects of various treatments on young thorn scrub plants. Specifically, can we make them grow into a multi-stem habitat more quickly? That was the deal. And if we could, then hopefully we could develop some protocol for future restoration projects. Our study site was a private ranch, the Eturia Ranch in Willacy County. Mr. Eturia passed away while we were doing this project, but he was very generous to let us work there. And he had some Nature Conservancy easements on there, and with the help of Sonia Najera, we worked on her easements that she had there. She helped us pick a pasture that we thought was probably the most ideal pasture, just given what was there and what wasn't there and that sort of thing. It was about 150-acre pasture. It was near known ocelot habitat. I don't know if you guys can see. I'm assuming that you can see a pointer on my screen when I use this pointer. But On the top of that blue rectangle, you can see a line of brush, and that's going along a road. And the ocelots had already been documented, some collared ocelots had already been documented using that strip of brush there. And so we knew they were close by, and we knew that this was, a good site. And hopefully, if we were successful at all, we could help create, some more habitat for them too while we were at it. Uh, Something had been done to clear it in the past, probably root plowing, and it had probably been in the past 20 years or so, and there were old scattered burn piles throughout. The specific hypotheses that we looked at, because we wanted to pick some things that anybody could use if they wanted to do this on their land, um, we picked shredding because we thought shredding might increase the branching complexity because these guys are all sprouters, resprouters and sprouters, whatever term you want to use. If you cut off that terminal leader, it will make a more complex branch. Um, Mulching, we thought mulching might help because it might help ameliorate the really harsh situation that these young plants are going to try to survive in by conserving some of the water in the soil around the plants. And then we thought, well, if those guys help, then maybe putting them both together might produce, an optimal combination. So, and then of course, control, not doing anything was the other treatment that we used. We had a two-prong approach, and I'll talk to you about the first prong first and then go on to the second phase. In phase one, we walked all through this pasture, several of us, walking together, spread apart, making along transects, and we tried to mark with a little piece of flagging and also in a GIS program or GPS unit. We tried to mark all of the young, naturally established woody plants that were already there. And we were going to assign these 4 treatments to those woody plants. Those 5 sampling periods is when we sampled. We only sampled twice a year because Thornscrub is so slow growing. It wasn't really necessary to, come out there once a month and measure these guys again. So summer, winter, from 2018 to 2020. Now, walking through and marking everything that we could find, we really only found enough of 3 species to work with. We would find a random snake eyes or, 3 or 4 of something else. But, for research, you need more than that. We found plenty, though, of Granjeno and Whitebrush and lime prickly ash. And this is another reason why I think that these communities are hundreds of years old at least, because I think some more common species, like these 3 that we found, can come in right away. Yes, this area was root plowed or manipulated in some way, but then it had been left alone for at least a decade, with the Nature Conservancy. And so there are just a few species that were able to come back first, and I think they're going to make the soil, particularly, a better habitat for the other species that we typically find in the older growth. So we picked 160 individuals of each of those species randomly in a GIS. We told the GIS program to pick them and make them at least 5 feet apart, and then we had it assign those treatments. And so our treatments on those plants were shredding or simulating shredding, I should say, because we were just doing one plant at a time. We used loppers to just cut them off about 6 inches high, and that was simulating shredding. With mulch, we just bought mulch and we spread it out at least 3 inches deep, with a 24-inch diameter circle with the plant in the middle. And then we combined that for a quarter of them, and then a quarter of them got nothing at all, and we just followed them. A problem that we identified really quickly while we were choosing, we're just walking through looking for plants. Mystery Turia really enjoyed seeing lots of herbivores, lots of browse, and lots of browsing species, I should say. In addition to many, many, many white-tailed deer, he had black buck, he had oryx, he had water buck, just about anything that you can find in South Texas was there, and he really enjoyed that. We recognized, like I said, pretty early on that that was probably going to be a problem for us. So what we did was we made exclosures around 72 of the plants. We just took a cattle panel, wrapped it around the plant with the plant in the center, and we secured it with 2 T-posts. They were randomly selected plants, 6 of each species and each treatment combination. And then for the variables that we measured plant height, we measured the maximum and minimum crown diameter, and same with basal diameter. The height to the first main stem, which turned out to be really not important, and not, or I don't know that it's not important, but it didn't really vary over anything. And the number of stems. For the eggheads out there, here's the statistics that we use. We used analysis of covariance because some of the plants were bigger to begin with. We picked all young plants, but they were a variety of sizes. And so that pre-treatment data was used as a covariance, basically, in an ANOVA. And so that makes it an ANCOVA. So let's just get right into results. I'm going to have a lot of graphs that look similar to this. So let me just get you, oriented here. We've got the sampling periods across the bottom. And in this graph, we're just looking at exclosure, protection from the browsing species versus no exclosure. And you can see with Whitebrush, the exclosures made a big difference. So without an exclosure, they're much smaller than they are with an exclosure, except at the very beginning. Now let's look at our treatments. We had shredding and mulching, and then a combination. Shredding made the plants smaller in crown area. Mulching really made no difference at all, and there was no interaction when we used shredding and mulching together. So I've got them both together here for Granjeno, and you can see a really similar trend here with crown area. With Granjeno, crown area was greatly affected by exclosure. Those ones with the exclosures over there on the left are much bigger crown area than without an exclosure. And then in the right graph, again, shredding made a difference and it made them smaller. Mulching made no difference and there's no interaction. Now with lime prickly ash, very similar here in crown area, but maybe not as drastic as with Granjeno. Like if we look at this one and then we go back and we look at Granjeno, there's a big difference for Granjeno between an exclosure and not an exclosure, and that tells us that Granjeno is really tasty. For browsers, and lime prickly ash is okay, they'll eat it if they can, but it's not one of their preferred species. Then shredding again made a difference, but made them smaller in crown area. Mulching made no difference. Now let's look at plant height. Again, here's our exclosure difference. There's a difference in exclosures over time. In Whitebrush, shredding made them shorter. Mulching did not have an effect, and there was no interaction. Granjeno, same thing. You're starting to get the picture here, right? Shredding or exclosures make a difference. in plant height as well, and it's a big difference for Granjeno. They're basically not growing much at all if they're not protected. Shredding made them shorter. Mulching made no difference. Lime prickly ash was a little more complicated, so I've broken them out. Um, Again, with height, lime prickly ash did better when it was protected, but it wasn't as drastic as like with whitebrush and Granjeno. Now, here's where we have some interaction. If you look at the lower left there, where they weren't mulched at all, um, shredding and where they were mulched. So same thing. Not shredded was taller than shredded. If we come over here to where they have an exclosure, if they have mulch, shredding makes a difference. If they don't have mulch, shredding doesn't really make a difference if they didn't have mulch. And when we just look at the treatments uh, alone, shredding made them shorter, mulching had no effect. Because of those interactions, we broke that out over time. There was a period by treatment interaction. In other words, over time, shredded plants actually got shorter over time, and non shredded plants were taller over time. Or I don't know, I don't want to say that shredding plants got shorter, but shredding plants were shorter than the non shredded. That's a better way to say that. And then the mulched plants were similar at each period. And so here's our periods down here at the bottom, with and without mulch, with and without shredding, and so on. Um, so lime prickly ash was a little more complicated, but the story doesn't change a whole lot. Now, number of stems is really important, like we said, because we don't want one tree-like plant. We want a multi-stemmed plant. Um, with the period effect over time, this is all of our treatments put together. Whitebrush did grow more stems over time, and the shredding led to fewer stems. I'm sorry, I have a that's wrong right there. It should say fewer plants. Shredding led or fewer stems. Shredding led to fewer stems. Mulching didn't make a difference, and there wasn't. Oops. There really wasn't an interaction. There is an exclosure effect again. Over time, all the treatments put together, no exclosure makes fewer stems than an exclosure. So protection actually helped them create more stems, and in a way that might be a little bit counterintuitive. So that one, I don't really know how to make a lot of sense out of it, except to just say that, long story short here, protection from those browsers really helped. With Granjeno, they did grow more stems over time, but the big difference was between periods 1 and 2. Shredded Granjeno plants had fewer stems. Mulching made no difference, and an exclosure also made a difference. Here again, an exclosure gives you more stems rather than fewer stems, so protection is a good thing. With lime prickly ash, number of stems, again, the big increase, they did increase, but the big increase is just between the first and second period. They went from about 50 to 150 stems. There is an interaction here again with lime prickly ash. The protected plants had a shred by mulch treatment interaction, in that those plants that were protected but not shredded grew more stems. Unprotected plants didn't have that treatment interaction. So with no protection, both treatments are smaller. With protection, uh, only the non-shredding here in the yellow gives you more stems. And the last thing that we really thought was maybe important was basal area. Basal area, of that stem as it's coming out of the ground. Whitebrush branches it looks like they may have been, well, there's some up and down going on here, which is really weird. Um, and we noted, it wasn't really part of the study, but we noticed that there was some damage, and it was probably mostly due to those browsers. Um, so, there's maybe a little bit of growth going on here, but not a whole lot of growth in basal area, and that's to be expected anyway. Granjeno and lime prickly ash had no significant effects of anything, and they really didn't grow so much. So I'm not going to waste your time with a graph there. So if we summarize that phase one, where we picked plants that were already there, here are some overall findings. The plants did grow over time in crown area and height, but over the short period of time, shredding resulted in smaller plants. So if we want to look at shredding, we probably need, these plants are really slow growing. So we need more than 2 years to really see what shredding would do. Mulch had very little effect on plant growth at all. And shredding plus mulch actually resulted in smaller plants when they were put together, but mulch itself had little effect on plant growth. Exclosures seemed to be the big thing here in phase one. So I think, any future projects really need to take that into account, that we've either got to remove browsers or just really do a severe culling or protection of some kind. Okay, let's look at phase two. For phase two, we got saplings that were grown at Texas, at the Nature Conservancy's Southmost Preserve. And they were able to give us 100 saplings of seven different species that would be really common there in the Tamaulipan Thornscrub. And we planted those. Those were planted in November. A fall planting is usually the most ideal for them. And they were planted in a grid of small rectangles. There are 100 1 meter by 2 meter plots, and so not very big plots. And one of each of those 7 species was stuck in those 1 by 2 meter plots, and that's not overdoing it from what we understand in the literature. You just have to plant these guys really closely together, and there should be several, per square meter. Then within a plot, within one of those 1 by 2 meter plots, everybody in that plot got the same treatment. So everybody got shredded, or everybody got mulched, or everybody got both. And again, the first sampling period, the measurements were taken with, before the treatments were done, and then the treatments were done right after they were measured. And then we had summer and winter and summer again. And here we used an ANOVA because they were all pretty much the same size when we got them. So very similar statistics that we looked at, or variables that we looked at. So let's start with Whitebrush. We looked at crown area. Here's crown area on the left and number of stems on the right. With crown area, everybody put together, they did grow larger crowns over time, and they did increase the number of stems over time, all treatments put together. Now, if we look at the treatments, there was a shredding and mulching interaction in basal area. And so you see over on the left, you've got no shredding and shredding. And then if there's no mulch, they grew a whole lot. When there was mulch, really no change. The mulch, the no mulch shredded did not differ from just the shredded. So period by mulching, there was also an interaction with the sampling periods. You can see they did grow larger, but the no mulch grew, the basal area grew much larger, much faster than when they were mulched. Now, if we look at plant height of whitebrush, there is an interaction here too. In periods 3 and 4, there was a treatment by period interaction in that the control plants in periods 3 and 4 were the tallest. The mulch plants were the shortest. And here again, you see we don't really have much differences here between shred and mulch in period 3 and period 4. There's really not much going on. But when we look at mulch and no shred, they're taller. I'm sorry, no mulch and no shred, they're taller than mulch and no shred. No mulch and shred, no mulch, no shred is not much different. So, or mulch no shred is not different. Sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied here. In period 4, very similar to period 3, the no mulch, no shred were the tallest by the end of period 4. That's the most important thing. So let's move on to Texas ebony. We have a stem count and a crown area and a plant height graph here for you. That you can see that the stem count increased over time in their sampling periods. The crown area also increased over time. The plant height also increased over time, but there was a mulch by period interaction with plant height. So if we look at this one over on the far right, when they are not mulched in the blue, in period 3, they were much taller than those that were mulched. But by period 4, the no mulch had caught up to the mulch. So not a big difference in the long run. And then snake eyes, we've got stem count, basal area, plant height, and crown area going on here. You can see the number of stems did increase, and these increases are mostly for these saplings that we planted. I think maybe, you know, that first spring, it's almost always a reduction or a lower, you know, number or no growth in whatever variable we're looking at. Maybe just a little bit of planting shock, you know, that we're seeing in period 2. But then by period 3, they start growing again. And in some variables like basal area, by the time they get to period 3, they are bigger than when we planted them. And same with crown height. And then crown height continues to grow, but basal area didn't continue to grow in period 4. With lime prickly ash, we had, again, you see that second period, you know, let's call it transplant shock that we're seeing there. But number of stems by period 3 is increasing, plant height is increasing, crown area is increasing, and crown area continues to increase, whereas plant height, number of stems sort of stay stable in period 4. Now, there was a treatment by period interaction in the lime prickly ash again for the basal area. And you see where you see it is over here in period 2. In period 2, where they did not get mulch and they were not shredded, they're much taller than when they did get mulch and they were not shredded. And then just the opposite, when they get mulch and they were shredded, they're taller than when they didn't get mulch and they were shredded. So there's some strange things going on in period 2. And again, it might just be a transplant sort of shock in those first 6 months. So if we look at Texas ebony, now basal area also has an interaction like we had with lime prickly ash. Sorry. The controls had large increases from periods 3 to 4 in their basal area. The treatments, the various treatments, but were growing at from similar rates from periods 1 through periods 4. But again, you see when we mulch and we shred, we have smaller basal areas. When there's no mulch, shredding actually gave us a bigger basal area over time. So interesting there. Now, let's look at survival. The reason why I'm not showing you all of the variables for all 7 species is because we had really low survival. Whitebrush fared the best. Its control plants had the highest chance of survival of anybody. And in Whitebrush, across the board, all treatments combined, 43% of those saplings that we planted survived. Snake eyes, only 20% of them survived, and it just, gets worse from there. And so from Granjeno and Brazil and Desert Yopon, we really have nothing to show because by the end, there weren't any left. And some of them, there were only a couple of them left by period 2. They just didn't survive being planted very well. So overall, there's really high mortality, likely from heavy browsing. Joey, by this time, was doing the majority of the field work, and he reported a lot of times seeing like here you can see in this middle picture. I hope you can see my area, my arrow. But in the middle photo, you can still see the paper remnants of seedlings, paper pot that it was grown in, and that was stuck in the ground. And you see pellets from some sort of browser. Here's a pellet latrine over here on the left and on the right, and some of their latrines, just after we planted, they just really liked that area and hung out there. So probably most likely from heavy browsing. When there were differences between treatments, the control treatments performed the best. So using those, so going back just for a sec, control treatments performing the best tells us that, doing anything to them right as you stick them in the ground is not going to be ideal. They're going to have enough on their hands just trying to survive. So for discussion and recommendations, obviously using naturally occurring seedlings where possible worked better than transplanted seedlings. The problem there is that you just don't have the diversity that we would like to see in the Tamaulipan thornscrub. Some species, most particularly lime prickly ash, showed an increase in stem counts after shredding treatment, but most of them did not. And maybe it was because we only did this study for 2 years, and doing a longer study would be ideal. Obviously, tree tubes do result in higher survival than this in this study, but they also result in that single stemmed form. And we knew that going into it, that the tree tubes would help, but we wondered if you shred them right away, would they spend some time below ground getting established, and then put up multiple sprouts, but we didn't see that happen. So exclosures or removal of browsers is going to be really important. Just having too many browsers was a huge problem. And what we think would be, if we could do this again, or if we could do, if we wouldn't do this again, if we could try again, and we had longer, we had funding for a longer period, and I'm not complaining about the funding. Texas Parks and Wildlife was very generous to us, but if you could study it for a longer time, what we're thinking is use tree tubes initially, let them get established for 1 or 2 years, and then come back and try your shredding or something else to affect that single stem form that they're going to have. So that would be our recommendation for the future. We have a lot of people to thank: Texas Parks and Wildlife, the Eturia Ranch, and Mr. Eturia himself, the Nature Conservancy, Southmost Preserve, and Sonia Najera. Um, and just real fast before I leave, I want to plug our new podcast. If you haven't listened to it, you can find it on any app where you listen to podcasts. You'll be able, iHeartRadio and Spotify and all of those places, you'll be able to find a Talk on the Wild side. And we talk about all things wild in Texas. So everything from uh, restoring oyster reefs and dealing with exotic blue stems, old world blue stems, to deer and quail and horn lizards and all that good stuff. So tune into that. Um, I don't know. I hope we have time for questions. Maybe a few minutes.
Yep, I think we do have time for a few questions, and we have a few in the Q&A right now. But first, thank you so much. That was super interesting. It's a really complicated project, and I agree this kind of work is difficult to do in a very short period of time.
It is.
That's the whole problem with Thornscrub, isn't it? Just how long it takes to regrow. Um, so Hillary Swartz asked a question: was mulch reapplied each year, or was it applied once at the start of the study?
It was just, thanks for the question, Hillary. It was just applied once at the start of the study for both phases.
And then Justin Foster asked, he said, and if this was covered, but I missed it because of my audio, I apologize. He had a few issues at the beginning. What are the conditions of the grid plantings? Is the soil augmented, or is it just native soil from the auger, or is just native soil from the auger used? What soil is used in the starts before they are planted? How much hydration is provided at planting time? So we had a few questions there.
Okay. At planting time, it is native soil, and the native soil goes back into the hole with the sapling. We did fill, and I left this out, so thank you for asking, but we did fill the hole with water to hopefully fill in those, macro pores and things like that. So we did pour water into the hole until it was basically full, um, with each one that we planted. But we didn't come back, and water later. We didn't come back and add mulch. Um, One thing, and these are great, great questions, but one thing, like when you're doing this over a large area, like we would like to see happen sometime, is, you know, it's really difficult then if you're gonna come back in and mulch, you're either gonna be driving on things or you're gonna be stepping on them, and the same with water. And it's also just really expensive to water over time out in the field. We're talking about trucking water in. But good
Um, and
question.
s- so the next one is from Melanie Hollenshed. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. Um, and she asked, do any of these plants reproduce from shredded portions of the plant?
That's a really good question. Um, I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. I would doubt that they would. I would seriously doubt that they would, especially in such a harsh environment. But so my answer would be probably not, but we didn't study that, and I haven't read of anybody who has. So I can't answer that definitively.
Um, so the next question is, I'm just going to do first names, is from Wilfred, and she asks, I am in the northwest corner of Goliad County, and I have 50% to 65% of this brush habitat. Any chance for ocelots, or any chance they would ever move further into Texas?
This is a great question, and I drive through lots of areas of Texas, or the southern part of Texas, and a lot of times you look out and you think, man, there should be ocelots out there, and maybe there are. Um, as far as them moving from Willacy County really very far, there are some obstacles. Young males, of course, have to disperse just like young males of any cat population. You can't live in daddy's territory once you're grown. So young males have to disperse. And that's mostly what kind of roadkill you get as a young male, and he was probably, branching out for some territory of his own. It could maybe happen, but it would be really tough for them to do, honestly, and without some help. Uh, the Texas State Aquarium has a couple of females that we helped them acquire from a zoo in Arizona, and I helped to design the habitat for them. And those females are going to be bred, and hopefully, those kittens will be released into the wild. But they probably will be released into the wild very close to these other populations because it's one point is to reduce the bottleneck, the genetic bottleneck in these populations. Honestly, I don't really think they just don't have anywhere to go, to be honest, because there are so many obstacles to get from like where they are to where you are.
Yep. And they get they just get hit by cars so
Yeah.
easily, and
Yeah. And a male
has
might make it out somewhere, but then who's he going to mate with? So
yeah.
I don't know.
Hugo asked, has anyone tried irradiated seeds? It would suffer from transplant mortality, of course.
We didn't try seeds at all, and so I didn't. I don't know if I want to say that I haven't ever read anybody trying irradiated seeds. These seeds, I tell you what, the guy, his name is Max Pons down at the Nature Conservancy's Southmost Preserve. He is a genius at getting these guys. Part of their problem is they don't just, the seeds don't just sprout really easily. He's figured out, he's done this for many years, and he has figured out for each species, you know, uh, does it have to be scarified? Does it have to be stratified? Does this, that, how, does it have to be soaked and for how many days or weeks or whatever? And he's got a different regime for each species to get those seedlings started. That's problem number 52 is these seeds just don't establish really well on their own.
So I'm noticing a few people are putting comments in the chat, and I'm going to direct you to the Q&A. Nobody's really monitoring the chat right now, so if you're one of them, throw it in the Q&A. And we're also getting close to the end of our time, so maybe some of these questions we can just give your one line answer to, if so we can try to get through. I mean, the next one should be really easy.
Sure.
It's,
Oh,
can you briefly describe shredding? And my understanding is like it's a big lawnmower on the back of a
yeah.
tractor.
Yep. It is. It just going through with a big implement and it takes off the top of the plant.
Joseph Barnett asked, thank you so much for speaking out your
You're welcome.
results. I'm very curious about why shredding impacted the growth rate so much versus mulching. Was the shred layer much higher than the mulch?
So they were shredded to
Is it possible? Okay, sorry. I was just wondering if you misunderstood what shredding was, or maybe I'm misunderstanding the
yeah.
question.
Uh, yeah, they were shredded. They were to simulate shredding. They were clipped off at 6 inches because that's about where you might put your shredder height if you're going to shred. We just kind of went with 6 inches after reading some things. Um, and then the mulch was only 3 inches deep. Those are two very different things, though. The shredding is taking off the top of the plant, and so you should expect it to get smaller initially. Um, and the mulch is adding, just some biomass to hold the water in.
And Mitch Sternberg asks, is it possible that the mulch was deep enough that it overheated the stem and shallow root zone?
Yeah, that could have happened. The way to figure that out would be to plant a bunch of saplings with different layers of mulch. It might have been it might not have been deep enough. It might have been too deep, but we had to we had to pick something and try it. But yeah, good question.
And Lisa Martinez asked, she said the study is to increase survival rate of habitat for ocelots during this period, especially with exclosures. The ocelots do not have access to the plants, right?
The ocelots, yeah, could go anywhere. But yeah, so they could, and surely some walked past or walked through or whatever because they're very near. They're already walking on that road, but they do stay very where it's very dense.
Um, Adrian Ramos asks, how can the public help?
Oh gosh, this is a great question. um, yeah, I love that the public is interested in this, but how you can help, if you're a landowner, if for landowners in South Texas where there are really brushy areas, if we could quit clearing the brush, that would be terrific. For the public, you could support the Nature Conservancy. um, Gosh, there are you can go to conservation.org. I no, sorry, conservationplates.org. There are ocelot license plates still, I think. Is that right, Jonah? And that money
There
goes
are, go ahead.
that I think that money goes to non-game animals like ocelots and other things
So
like that.
I'll have to double check. So I don't believe, so Texas Parks and Wildlife has our own. So we have the horn lizard plate,
Hmm.
and there's a rattlesnake, and I think that we're coming out with a monarch one. There's a few different conservation plates that we have
Yeah, I have the
that come
monarch
back to.
one.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think we have a hummingbird one too. Anyway, they
yeah,
they come back to fund this kind of research through
yes.
Parks and Wildlife. I believe the ocelot one goes somewhere else.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. But if you go to conservationplates.org, you get to see the different plates and where the money goes to. But look for places like that, like the Nature Conservancy, who's doing this good work. They've already got that easement there, and they're trying their
yeah.
best.
I just
Yeah.
double checked. That one goes to the Friends of Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge.
Okay. And
So
there are also
both
ocelots
will
there.
go to good places. Yeah.
Yes.
Um, so we have a few more questions. I'm going to stop answering questions that came in after about 1 o'clock. So do you have a few more minutes to answer the
I
remaining
do.
5 questions?
I do.
Okay. So Evelyn Mers asks, is it possible to grow out plants and manage their growth so that they are multi-stemmed at the time when they are transplanted? The measurements, the measurement were for crown area and height. Is crown area more important since you want dense cover? So two questions, I guess.
Yeah. That first question, I suppose it is possible, but um, in a way, planting. I kind of feel like just from studying plants, I haven't done that specifically, but from studying plants, I kind of think that a small plant has a better chance for survival than a plant that's already a little bit bigger because it is a very harsh environment. Um, and and that would it's probably possible, and that's a good question. I love all these out of the box questions because they're great things to think about, though. And as far as crown area is concerned, yeah, area is really important because they're not going to be tall trees. They're going to be, they need to be greater than 2 meters tall, but maybe 20 feet tall, tops when they max out. And so they're not going to be really tall trees, but they do need to have crown area, and it needs to be down low to the ground. You can't walk through this stuff.
Um, And so Mitch Sternberg had another question. None of these species are known to root and or resprout from dropped, lopped branches. So I guess he was answering that question.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch.
Um,
I had a feeling, but I didn't know for sure. So yeah.
yeah. Um, Teresa Hall asked, what impact, if any, is the border wall having on migration of the ocelot? Can they get through it, under it, or around it?
I cannot answer that question. Maybe Jonah, you guys would
Yeah,
probably
I
be
can
better.
briefly. I mean, the, clearly barriers to movements for wildlife are not a great thing for any species that's an interconnected, widely dispersed species. Uh, that said, there's already a lot of barriers for that species with all the development in Brownsville and the highways and stuff. So I don't know that there's a lot of documented movement of ocelots going across the river and back at this time. Um, so I mean, yeah, it's probably somewhat unknown, but my hunch is that there is already a large amount of restriction to their movement in that area. Um, Jose asked during what time of year were both projects using the existing ones and potted ones conducted?
So, for the existing ones, we took the initial measurements in summer 2018, and then we did the treatments right after that. And then they were measured winter and summer of 19 and winter and summer of 20. And then for the ones that we planted, they got planted in the fall of 18. The initial measurements were taken right after that, and that was basically so winter of 18. So they got winter of 18, summer and winter of 19, and summer of 20.
And then Mitch Sternberg asked again, so they were clipped by hand at 6 inches and not shredded using a tractor implement as might be expected on a typical ranch? Question mark. Sorry if I missed that in the intro. And I believe that's what you said. You simulated shredding because they're individual plants.
Yes, because we had, uh, so, you know, we're we needed the all of the treatments in order to be scientific and for all of the treatments to be independent. You can't just go in and shred one entire pasture and then mulch the other entire pasture. Those and then measure all the plants in there because those aren't independent treatments. So, in order to have independent treatments, we had to randomly choose plants in there to get a treatment. So you couldn't really take a shredder in and shred over one plant that was supposed to get shredded and not disturb the other plants. So yes, the shredding was a simulated shredding on one plant at a time, if that makes sense.
Almost done here. So Hillary Schwartz asked, did the exclosures keep out bunnies or just larger browsers?
They were not, we did not put like chicken wire down at the bottom of them. We talked about that and thought about that, and we decided that the biggest threat was the big guys, and so it was just a cattle panel keeping out the large hoof stock. That's a good
And
question.
then And then Will Newman just added a comment. He said there are USDA funded conservation programs available that focus on ocelot habitat, and signed Will Newman, TPWD Farm Bill Coordinator, and left a phone number there. So it seems like an invitation to contact him if there's interest there.
Yeah, great resource for for the public who wants to help.